Do you have the picture of La Conquistadora? Yeah, that's who I'm going to talk about. She'll come back. She does that. So once again, it is Advent, and once again, I come to bring you news of the wild, wacky, and wonderful world of Catholicism. This year's exploration began one Sunday during the Spanish Mass at St. Patrick's. It is a Mass which my rusty Spanish does not quite allow me to follow entirely, but that may be all to the good. My amens can be all the more enthusiastic if I don't know exactly what it is I am endorsing. This is perhaps why the Latin Mass endured for so many centuries. I like to hang out at the Spanish Mass, anyhow, because it reminds me of America, at least of my idea of America. Loads of families, beautiful little children, friendly people shyly welcoming one another. Also, I like thumbing through the missal while I am failing to keep up with the words of the service, because at the back of the missal they tell you about the saints' days, and that is where a person like me can discover new and wonderful saints, which is how I encountered Our Lady of Quiche, a small wooden statue of Mary. She was crafted in Ecuador in the 1500s by an itinerant woodcarver. The church that had commissioned the little statue refused in the end to pay for her. They stiffed the artist. So he stuffed her into his saddlebag, and that is where she was resting when he came into the jungle to buy good cedar wood from the natives. What the artist did not have in his saddlebags was money, so he pulled out Our Lady in hopes of negotiating some kind of trade. And as it happened, the tribe was interested. They were very interested indeed. "We know her," they said. "Oh yes," said another. "She's the lady who lives in the cave." And then another, "That's the woman who watches over our little children and protects them from the bears." And so the deal was sealed, and the little statue settled into the cave that she had apparently always inhabited, the place where she belonged. After a while, the people noticed that the birds would come and sing to her. So they began to sing to the little statue as well. And they learned too that whenever a little child was mauled by a bear, they should bring the child to the cave and let them touch the lady, and then all would be well. All these things happened nearly 500 years ago. But in Ecuador, the people still go on pilgrimage every November to say hello to the statue they have come to call La Pequeñita, the very little one. It is a 10-hour walk from Quito. There are fireworks. These days you are not allowed to touch her, but if you bring a small scrap of cloth, her people will lift it up so it touches the lady. Then you can take that piece of fabric home so that you will have it on hand for the next time you or someone you love gets mauled by a bear. I was all set to take off for Quito, when it occurred to me that there was another small wooden statue of Mary, somewhat closer to hand, and that she too might have stories. La Conquistadora inhabits her own chapel in the Santa Fe Cathedral, 1/2 block from our second home in New Mexico. La Conquistadora is a somewhat grandiose name for this little person who stands about 2 feet tall and who, carved out of willow wood, is about as light as a feather. Scientists tell us she was carved in Spain sometime in the 1400s, but she did not arrive in New Mexico until 1625, traveling for 2 years by ox cart from Mexico City. She arrived on the same wagon train that brought the Spanish Inquisition to the territory. A wise woman once explained to me that whenever you find great goodness, you should expect to find some equally great evil lurking nearby. No one, as we know, is ever ready for the Spanish Inquisition. But the New Mexico pioneers were especially unready. Having left Mexico City in 1590 precisely to avoid the inquisitors. Part Aztec, part Jewish, now part Pueblo, and having acquired heresies from all their ancestors, these pioneers, like most of us, were in no condition to face scrutiny of any sort, much less by the Spanish Inquisition. What the frontier folk were prepared for was falling in love with La Conquistadora. They carried her in procession. They lighted little fires for her out of sweet-smelling piñon. They dressed her in silk and eagle feathers. Then in 1680, the Pueblo Revolt came. Rebels killed the Franciscans and burned their churches. The defeated Christians began the long walk to exile in El Paso. It was a Pueblo woman who carried La Conquistadora in her arms on that long trek. They would live in exile for 12 years. That bloody revolt was enough to stir even the moribund Spanish Empire into action. The King of Spain at the time was known as the Bewitched One. Nonetheless, Spain managed to scrounge up an actual Spanish grandee to send into the wilds of New Mexico. Don Diego de Vargas Zapata Luján, Ponce de León y Contreras. Yes, he was related to that Ponce de León, and to most of the great and the near great of Spain's golden age, including Spain's most popular saint, San Isidro, the patron saint of farmers. Back in the year 1000 or so, Isidro had been foreman on the de Vargas estates. It had been Don Diego's ancestor who noticed angels, one on the right and one on the left of Isidro, plowing the fields with him. Maybe, he said, this was why Isidro could do the work of 3 men. Old man de Vargas likely meant this as a joke and an elegant compliment. But then the artist took over, and nowadays you can find an angel pushing a plow in almost every church in Spain. But back to our New Mexico de Vargas. Armed with self-confidence, 200 soldiers, and 7 cannons, Don Diego marched into Santa Fe, and after several days of negotiation and ample Pueblo inspection of his cannons, he persuaded the occupiers to accept the bewitched Spanish king as their sovereign. Santa Fe has celebrated this bloodless reconquest every September since then. There are fireworks and processions and the burning of a giant puppet called Old Man Doom. Myself, I do not celebrate that day. Trust me to pick a Saturday. I mark the December days, months later, when La Conquistadora herself arrived, together with her 800 people, returning home at last from Texas. Except the rebels would not let them in. The people had to camp in the snow outside of Santa Fe. De Vargas had found to his surprise that since his first visit, the city had been walled against him, and it was now thronged with Pueblo warriors. Daily he went to the city walls to explain to the rebels the duty they owed to the Spanish God and their bewitched king. Meanwhile, women and children waited in the snow for most of Advent and then for all of Christmas. Soon, the
pulling his hair out. We can't hear you.
police waited for the ransom demand, $150,000. The phone call was traced to a teenager who police had already suspected. The boy led them to an abandoned mine in the mountains where they found La Conquistadora together with several other stolen statues, including the Archangel Michael from his church, St. Michael's, in Santa Fe. There are those who say that it was La Conquistadora who masterminded this entire caper. They say that the Archangel Michael was her friend. She had lived in the Church of St. Michael's for a time while her chapel was being renovated. She had been searching for him ever since the theft, and she was determined to bring him home. And she knew that that particular cave in the mountains was haunted. It had long been haunted by a 17th century Spanish soldier, and he had once been among her caballeros, so she knew that he would have her back and she would be safe there. Also, the would-be teenage mastermind who organized the theft was only weeks away from his 18th birthday. Once past that date, no amount of confessing and repenting and cooperating with police would have kept him from doing hard time in prison. La Conquistadora, on the other hand, was a little bit excited about doing hard time. She had lived through exile and she had lived through war. But until they locked her up in the evidence room at the county jail, she had never been imprisoned. And she knew that trouble was informative. Exile taught you to love home. War schooled you in peace. And jail made you really, really, really love freedom. So she was as joyful as her people when her caballeros came and unlocked the door and carried her in procession back to her home. The cathedral bells rang. All the children were there marching with her. And suddenly she realized there was nobody on the sidewalk anymore. All of Santa Fe had joined in the procession. For that one moment, her people were with her, in love with home, in love with peace, in love with freedom, all at once and all together. But by tomorrow, who knew? Sometimes she thought it was because her people were too tall, just too tall to pay close attention for very long to the little things, to the simple things that were merely true. But that's why they needed her, La Conquistadora, because she was a person who never forgot about love. She was always there to remind them that love conquers all.
Another story we would never have heard without you. Thank you. Well, let us all stand in body or spirit for our closing hymn, number 233, Bring a Torch, Jeanette, Isabella. Oh, this is...
So these songs today, I thought we were going to be talking about Mary. So they're about Mary. We are not going to do the Mary song in French, though. So, I know.
Oh, good.
So, so we'll do the first verse in English.